think I would have to definitely say my sister. She is one of those few individuals who has seen a lot of adversity in various things in her life, and she definitely walks with her faith through everything. Between long bouts of infertility, through losing a husband, through medical issues of her own, but still with an unwavering faith of knowing that above it all that God is good, and definitely that's what I draw my strength from, is by her example. So many things. It's the feeling of inadequacy in so many things. It's the pull of comparison to others, especially seeing others being used, having a platform, doing big things for God, and then feeling like being inadequate because there's not that one big thing, not the one big issue to tackle. I think that probably is a daily struggle. Sometimes when I'm struggling the most, or when I feel the lowest, God places somebody in my path that I find, that we help each other, that either they needed me at that moment or I needed them. And so it grounds me and shows me that it's not the big things, that He doesn't call us all for big platforms. He doesn't call us all for big things. Sometimes it's just the daily, how our daily interactions with others. And so I think that's one of the things that I strive for, I pray for, I look for, is to place those in my path that need me, or that I need them, so that they can know me and know us, by our love. But it doesn't always have to be something big, that everyone needs something.
So the question that we've been asking over and over and over again throughout this past year with the Village is simply this: what does it mean for us to follow Jesus? What's it mean for us to be followers of Jesus? And so it's no accident that we've kicked off the last month, and we're in this series where we're looking at instances in the gospel where we find the word follow, or where Jesus says, follow me, or where it talks about being followers of Jesus, because we want to do everything we can to understand what that means so that we can live it out. This is the first story. Stephanie's story is the first of the followers' stories that we're recording. And if you're interested in leaving your story with us and telling your story to us, you can email Heather. That's in your bulletin. But we want to see what it looks like for real people to learn how to follow Jesus. We want to hear the stories of real people who are struggling with that every day. What does it look like? What's it mean for us to be followers of Jesus? And that's what we're trying to figure out together. So my question this morning is this: have you ever just taken a flyer on something? Like, have you ever taken a big risk about something or in the midst of something? I can think of a couple examples from my own life. Actually, I was given some warning. There might be some people in here today who are thinking about taking a risk. I saw this. This was on Facebook. I was tagged in this. It's some words, Max. You should be as excited about church as about the Super Bowl. So when your pastor makes a point this Sunday, pour Gatorade over his head. So I'm scared. I know there are some people back here. They were talking about coffee because of my love for coffee instead of Gatorade. So if you see somebody, would you give me a warning, or would somebody Todd, would you take them out? It can be like church linebacker, Todd Spillane. That would be fantastic. I took a risk. So people have asked me, who are you cheering for in the Super Bowl tonight? And my answer is always the Packers. I'm always cheering for the Packers. It's 5 years ago. I'm celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Packers Super Bowl victory over the Steelers. This is the game that I will be watching in my mind tonight. And I took a risk. I have a beautiful canvas here, and what if that didn't wash off, right? That was a big risk that I took. I see we have a beautiful Bears fan here in the bleachers, and I want you to know that in Jesus, I still love you. Just in football, we shouldn't talk about that probably. Another one, and probably one of the biggest risks, one of the biggest flyers that I ever took in my life that I can think about, happened September, the year that I was 19 years old. I was 19, and I took a risk. I answered a question. I asked a question that probably changed the course of my life more than any other risk or any other question that I ever asked or thought about. And really, the backstory is about a month prior to that, prior to this event in September, I was out mowing the yard of my fraternity house in college. It was in August, and so I was mowing the yard, and my friend Jennifer approached the yard. I was in the front yard. She approached the yard. I was going into my sophomore year. She was going into her senior year, and she said, "Hey, sorry to bother you. My sister, who's an incoming freshman, is here early to move some of her things into her dorm room. Would you be able to help?" And so I looked up from the mower. I looked up and I saw Amanda Girton, and I said, "Yes, I am definitely interested in, I'll carry anything. I'll definitely do that." So during the course of freshman orientation that year, I was an orientation leader, and I tried on several occasions to start conversation with Amanda. Now, there were some things going on with her that I didn't know about. Her family was moving. She'd been feeling sick, and so I perceived that to be a bit of reservation in talking to me. I thought she was a bit standoffish toward me. Well, after orientation was over, my buddy Dave and I made a plan that we wanted to go on an amazing double date. So we were going to go to the park. We were going to make a picnic. We were going to play on the playground. It was going to be an incredible, incredible date. The problem was we didn't have anybody to go with us at that point. So we recognized that problem. We began to make a list together. If we could ask anybody on campus to go with us on this date, who would we ask? So we made that list. The next day, the opportunity of a lifetime presented itself to me. And I walked down, there was a sand volleyball court on our campus with a pavilion. I walked down and I saw Amanda sitting on a picnic table, talking to a few friends there by the pavilion. And I thought, opportunity knocks, here we go. And so, in what has to be one of the smoothest ask out attempts ever in the history of the planet, I approached Amanda, we talked for a minute, and then I said, "So, hypothetically," what? Hypothetically, say you were a girl. Like right then, had her hooked, okay? So hypothetically, say you were a girl, and she said, I am a girl. I said, okay, well, hypothetically, say you were a girl, and she goes, actually, I'm a woman. Great, okay. So, say you were a woman. So hypothetically, say you were a woman and I was a guy. It's like, great job, Travis. You've just made it hypothetical on whether or not you're a guy, okay? Really well done so far. And so I kept struggling through this question that I wanted to ask her, and finally, she asked me a question in all of her mercy, and she looked at me and said, Travis Garner, are you trying to ask me out? And I said, no. Maybe. And she goes, how about I do this? Travis Garner, would you like to go out with me? And I was like, yes, I would. Yes, I would. Woo! Thank you. That's right. Thank you for the applause. Thank you. From that moment on, we essentially followed each other around campus for the rest of our college career, which was pretty awesome. But it was a question, it was a risk that changed my life. Asking the question, answering the question, changed my life forever. Now, there's a story right before the one we heard this morning with the disciples. And James and John, who were two of Jesus' disciples, decided that they wanted to take a big risk and they wanted to ask a big question. And so James and John, they're brothers. They were the third and fourth disciples that Jesus called after Peter and Andrew at the beginning of the Gospels. Now it says in the beginning of Mark's Gospel that Jesus gave James and John the nickname Sons of Thunder. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear that, I can't help but thinking about Saturday morning wrestling as a kid, the Sons of Thunder. I even looked it up, so I just Googled Sons of Thunder, and I was curious what came up. And there were like 3 entries about James and John, and the fourth one was a picture of Chuck Norris. right? Sons of thunder. It doesn't get any better than that. In fact, it was actually a fitting name for them. There's another story in the Gospels where Jesus has just sent the disciples out and he says, as you go, proclaim the good news of the kingdom and heal the sick. So after that, James and John have this dispute with people in a Samaritan village. And so they come back to Jesus and this is what they say to Jesus. Hey, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven on them to take them out? Is that what you'd like us to do? And it's like, anytime I feel like I'm not quite getting it as a disciple, I just remember James and John, right? Jesus has just sent them out to proclaim the good news of the kingdom, and they come back and say, hey, do you want us to go ahead and rain down fire from heaven on these people? Is that what you're asking us to do? So they're just a tad impetuous, right? They're just a tad bit reactionary in general. And so in Mark chapter 10, just before this story that Annabelle read for us, James and John have the nerve to come to Jesus, and they say this to Jesus, Jesus, teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Can you imagine being that bold with Jesus? We want you to do for us whatever we ask. And so Jesus, being the gracious rabbi that he is, looks at James and John and he says, okay, well, what do you want me to do for you? He asks them that question, what do you want me to do for you? The story says, James and John replied, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left hand when you come into your glory in your kingdom. So let one of us be your Secretary of Defense and one of us be your Secretary of State. And when you're sitting on a throne and people are looking at you and they're like, go King Jesus, they'll also be going, go James and John, you guys are awesome too. That's their request for Jesus. When Jesus gives James and John an opportunity to ask for anything, what do you want me to do for you? They ask for something that will give themselves glory. They respond by saying something that would give themselves glory. They want to be recognized as guys who are right up there with Jesus. So now we turn to this very next story in Mark's gospel that Annabelle read so beautifully for us this morning. And we actually hear Jesus ask the same question, but the response is a dynamic contrast between the response of James and John. Now, we don't know much about Bartimaeus. Bar is the Hebrew word for son, so Bartimaeus, as the text says, literally means son of Timaeus. Now, while we don't know much about him, we do know that people who were blind or people with other disabilities in the first century were completely dependent on the care of other people to take care of their basic needs. And so, given that Bartimaeus is blind, and given that he's sitting on the roadside begging, that's a pretty good indicator for us that Bartimaeus didn't have any family or friends who were there to take care of him. And so every need, he was sitting on the side of the road to beg in order to try to meet that need. Now, this day was different. He spent every day on the side of the road, stuck on the side of the road begging, just so that he could survive. But this day was a little bit different. You know, they will often say if one of your senses has some difficulty, your body will respond by creating a more sensitive senses in the other senses of your body. And so for Bartimaeus, his eyes weren't working in this case, but his sense of hearing was obviously working on this day, because here's what happened. It says he was sitting by the roadside begging like he did every day. But then he heard a large crowd approaching. He heard a large crowd approaching and he realized in that moment that Jesus was in the crowd. Now, he must have already heard something about Jesus before that point, because he hears the crowd approaching, he hears that Jesus is there, and he immediately begins shouting, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, it says the people around him rebuked him. The word it uses is rebuked. That's an interesting word in the Gospels, because often we see Jesus using the word rebuke when he's trying to cast out a demon or an evil spirit from someone. That's the word that's used in the first century in the Gospels, is the word rebuke. when it has to do with some kind of evil or unclean spirit. And so these people are rebuking. It's a harsh rebuke of Bartimaeus. And they probably yell at him. They're probably kicking at him. They're telling him to keep his mouth shut. But he doesn't listen. Instead of listening to them when they tell him to be quiet, he yells out all the louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And above the noise of the crowd, Jesus hears the call of Bartimaeus. And it says he stops. And he looks. And he says to the people who are gathered there, "Call him to me." And so the people who'd been shouting at Bartimaeus a few minutes earlier, they come over and in voices that probably still aren't that kind, they say, "Well, cheer up, Bartimaeus, get up. He's calling to you, come on over." So it says that Bartimaeus takes his coat off, he throws it on the road, he jumps up, he runs to Jesus, and Jesus looks at him, and Jesus says the same thing that Jesus said to James and John. He looks at Bartimaeus and he asks the question, "What do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you?" Now, in this moment, Bartimaeus had a decision to make. I mean, he could have asked Jesus for anything in this moment. James and John asked for their own glory. I wonder how often in our own prayer life, when we're approaching God, do we ask for things that are for our own glory? "God, would you do this for me? God, if you'll do this for me, I'll do this for you. But God, would you do this for me?" How often are we like James and John when we approach God in prayer? And Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, could have asked for anything. It would have made sense for him to ask for anything. He could have asked for food. He could have asked for water. He could have asked for a new cloak. He could have asked for money. And all of that would have made sense. But instead, Bartimaeus thinks of his deepest need. And to Jesus, he says, "Rabbi, I want to see. I want to see." And Jesus says, "Go. Your faith has healed you." And immediately he received his sight and began to follow Jesus on the road. James and John asked for their own glory. But when Bartimaeus is asked the same question, he responds with something that would give only God the glory. And I wonder how often in our prayer lives we pray for things that the only explanation would be God is amazing, God is glorious, God is powerful. That's the kind of thing that Bartimaeus prays for in this instance. Now, I want to make sure that we understand in this case that this is not a story of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. This is not a story of self-help. This is not a story of personal triumph or achievement. This, at the core, is a story of recognizing who Jesus is. See, Bartimaeus had been yelling out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Son of David. This is the first time in the Gospel of Mark that term, Son of David, is used. And when he yells those words, it's more than just talking about the family line of Jesus. This is not a nickname for Jesus. This is not just a flippant title for Jesus. He's yelling a statement of faith. You see, in the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament, for instance, in the book of 2 Samuel, God says to King David, "When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you. I will establish his kingdom. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father and he will be my son. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." See, Son of David is a title for the expected Messiah. It's a title for the promised one, the one who is to come, and to put all the broken pieces of the world back together. And we find throughout the Old Testament what that means for people. For instance, in Isaiah chapter 35, and I love this, the words of Isaiah chapter 35 say to the people, "Be strong, do not fear, for your God will come. He will come to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And so when Bartimaeus yells, Son of David, he's yelling, I believe that you're the Messiah. You're the promised one. You're the one that is to come. And because of that, he asks Jesus for something that only Jesus can give him in that moment. You see, this is a story of Bartimaeus admitting and recognizing his deep need for Jesus. And when he does that, he opens himself up for grace like he never could have imagined or never could have expected. And so this morning, I'm going to ask you to do something. I want to ask you, if you would, to close your eyes. Close your eyes. And I want you to simply imagine with me for a moment that it's you sitting by the side of the road. Now, as your eyes are closed, you may not this morning be blind in terms of your sight, but everybody has had a blind spot in their life. Everybody has some form of blindness in their life. There's some kind of problem that you can't seem to fix. There's some kind of issue or situation that you can't seem to change. There's some place that you feel stuck that you can't quite get out of on your own. There's something today that's getting in the way of you being the person that God created and intended you to be. And so as your eyes are closed, I want you to imagine yourself in the story. I want you to imagine yourself stuck, sitting by the side of the road. And as the crowds are coming by, as the people are walking by, as you hear that Jesus might be approaching, I want you to think about what might be keeping you there. What is it that's keeping you stuck there by the side of the road this morning? Is it an addiction? Is it an illness? Is it some kind of physical ailment? Is it a family problem? Is it a broken and fractured relationship? Is it a lack of faith that Jesus is who he says he is and can do what he says he can do? Is it a life of fear and doubt and anxiety? Are you ashamed of something from your past? Are you carrying a sense of guilt with you about something? What's keeping you stuck there this morning? And now I want you to imagine Jesus stopping along the road. And I want you to imagine Jesus approaching you and asking you this question: what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? And so if Jesus asked you that question this morning and you were fully confident in his ability to do whatever it is that you asked, what would you ask him to do for you this morning? I know the truth is many of us struggle in even answering a question like that because we think we can do it on our own. Many of us don't answer a question like that because we don't want to admit that we can't do it on our own. Or many of us this morning are afraid that if we answer that question and we give whatever that is over to God, that we might lose control of that situation as we allow God to take control. But this morning, What if you simply took a risk and answered that question? What if you answered that question from the place of your deepest need this morning? I don't know what you'll find in response. Maybe this morning, God will change you. Maybe this morning, through the power of the Holy Spirit, God will heal you in some way. Maybe God will simply change the situation through you. The truth is, I don't know. I don't know what your need is. And I don't know what God's response will be, but I do know this. When we open ourselves to the power of the Holy Spirit, when we share our deepest needs, when we bare our heart and our soul to God, it opens us up to the work of God's grace in ways that we could never expect or imagine. So this morning, the question is, what do you want me to do for you?